very young even now. What are you, 20 years old now?
Yes, sir.
And you've killed 2 human beings and wounded a third. I just wonder how that feels.
I don't think that's an appropriate question to ask how it feels. It's not an easy thing to do. It's something I live with.
Now, before we start this video, guys, I want to say this, that even though Piers Morgan has made a lot of strides to improve himself, he is still very, very much anti-gun, very, very much anti the people who, let's just say, those who enjoy gun culture. He is also still very, very much a Brit, and there's obviously a lot of things about him that still are very, very much anti any form of American laws. Basically, it means that he's still pretty much what we would call here in the United States a Democrat. Yes, I know he's of the British right, is what many people say, but still at the same time, the British right is almost the equivalent as the liberal here in the United States that is very, very much in favor of gun control. Now, he conducted this interview with Kyle Rittenhouse, roughly about 6 minutes of it is what I've got. We're not going to watch the whole thing like in linear notion. Don't worry, there's going to be breaks in this. But before we get started, I need to go ahead and say this about Piers. Anybody who, let's just say, is pro-gun control more than likely is somebody who either A, has not been to the range, or B, has a lot more fear of the actual weapon itself than needs to be done. Now, I am not saying that you should not fear a weapon. Obviously, being a Pro 2A guy who's handled firearms before, there is a such thing called firearm safety. And, of course, we'll talk about Kyle here in a second and that night and what it is that Kyle's dealing with and why it is that this situation is still very, very much important, and, of course, why it is that these types of incidents do, in fact, scar people, but why it was that Kyle was, in fact, in the right. Now, guys, the Chicago Sun-Times has the 2-minute clip of Kyle in action trying to get away from the protesters in Kenosha, Wisconsin that night. And they actually had the shooting of Matthew Huber, and, of course, this also includes Gage Grosskreutz, who I am sharing a photo of now because people were saying he was not armed when clearly he was armed. Now, I cannot show you guys that video here on YouTube, but I may make some adjustments and show parts of it in a documentary piece that I plan on doing next year, revisiting Kyle Rittenhouse, or I may put on a separate channel. As you guys know, I plan on creating a network of channels, mostly due to the algorithmic problems here and the fact this was a general purpose channel. But the thing about not going to the range is that therefore you don't get to actually experience exactly the actual things that we go through as far as gun safety is concerned. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded. Keep your finger straight and off the trigger until you intend to shoot. Never point a weapon at anything you do not intend to shoot. Basically, what we're saying is don't horseplay around with it. Actually respect the weapon. There should be a healthy level of fear, and you should be okay. But of course, you know, if you're ever planning on being able to defend yourself with a firearm, you obviously need to know proper gun safety. Now, I've made several videos about Kyle Rittenhouse and, of course, the situation that happened that night and why it was that he was justified or well than his right to use self-defense. However, there is another thing that, quite frankly, that I've discussed in a couple of videos that I think kind of gets misconstrued that we will talk about a little bit later on, especially when we get to the topic of how it is that he should feel. Quite frankly, I don't think he should feel guilty about what happened that night at all. I don't think he should. He simply defended himself. However, it's other feelings that don't typically tend to get mentioned, especially in the world of the media itself. But make sure you guys stick around for the full video because we will, in fact, get to that towards the end when we actually discuss this interview in particular. Now, you saw the very, very beginning, and you probably thought to yourself that Piers Morgan kind of set that thing up the wrong way. And let me just go ahead and kind of remind you guys of what I said before. Those who typically tend to rail against guns are typically people who have never actually been to a range or ever actually had any actually dealings with firearms. The thing about firearms is this right here. Once you actually learn to use one, you go to a range, you begin to start having fun with it. And the more fun you have, the understanding is that you eventually learn to eventually respect that weapon. There are, of course, people out there who do some very, very dumb things, but still at the same time, 99.9% of gun owners out there don't, how do I say, they don't fool around. They don't horse around, especially when it comes to a firearm. They understand. They treat the weapon. They respect the weapon. And, of course, they're even able to teach small children how to also do the exact same thing. Treat a weapon with actual, honest-to-God fear and respect and do it safely, which, of course, has been contention with a lot of people out there. Don't worry. I'll mention the person more towards the end of the video. But, of course, the person I'm mentioning is somebody who's had a bit of a coming around. But before we go any further, I need to go ahead and remind people about Piers Morgan's past. You see, Piers used to get in debates over guns with several people. he was the first person, or one of the first people, to try to jump on the bodies of Sandy Hook, try to stand and grandstand on top of those kids who had died, which, of course, during school shootings or mass shootings, the first thing that needs to happen is that there needs to be some mourning, and then we can have the conversation afterwards. Because when you immediately jump to politics, it immediately turns people off, and, of course, we're irrational. Of course, most of these people are politicians, just simply trying to whip up public opinion for their side, of course, because we live in a media that, quite frankly, is a WWE, and we live in a society now where politicians love to use the WWE playbook. Don't worry, we'll have a project on that next year. But here's the thing, though. Piers debated Ben Shapiro on this. He debated Ted Nugent on this on multiple occasions. And, of course, he eventually went to a Texas gun range. Let me go ahead and remind you.
Machine down here, which is, it looks to me like a kind of, military machine gun that you see in all the movies. But that, I understand, because it was made before 1986 and the last assault weapons ban, that is a legal weapon in this country. I could buy that. I need 6 months of background checks and...
It's a ATF paperwork that you have to fill out. You have to pay $200 to the ATF to actually fire this, or to actually purchase it. To fire it costs...
What would it cost me?
These run anywhere from 20. Yep. Right.
Okay.
Okay, hold on. Keep your fingers off the trigger.
Okay.
Go ahead and take it off a safe.
I'm going to take it off safe.
Okay.
Can you push it down hard.
Okay.
Okay.
Is it one bullet at fire or?
No,
Nope.
It's going to keep going as long as you keep it down.
Basically told that you have to fill out an ATF form, you have to go through a background check, and of course that there's also the state of Texas. I don't know about the fees. All I know is somebody who used to sell guns, what you would do is the person would fill out the paperwork, and of course you would call in the information to NICS, which is a division of the ATF, and they would do a background check, and of course if you pass that background check, it took anywhere between 20 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes 3 hours. It just depends on the wait time and exactly how much information they got to get. Come to find out that, that you had to go through that process to get a weapon. In order to get a pistol, a lot of times you got to fill out for a permit. That's actually at your local state courthouse, depending on your state's laws. That's going to determine that right there. But still, though, at the same time, you kind of see Piers there just kind of having a little bit of fun, squeezing the back trigger right there on that 50 caliber machine gun. It is a very fun weapon to fire. However, it is also a very dangerous weapon if not handled properly. I'm glad he had people there beside him because Piers doesn't really have a whole lot of knowledge of this. For all we know, he could have completely mishandled the entire weapon. With that right there out of the way, though, let's go ahead and get to the actual interview itself. So what Piers is doing is he's interviewing Kyle on how it is that he should feel, because Kyle does, in fact, plan on having a book come out here soon that's going to kind of detail the situation that he's been through, or the things that he's quite frankly had to go through since that night in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Here's a small piece of it there.
To deal with the PTSD and the trauma from having to do that.
Right. But it seems to me your emotions are more about you and your trauma because your life was being threatened and that side of it, rather than the question I'm asking, which is simply on a human level, how do you feel about being so young and yet having on the record for the rest of your life now that you took the lives of two people, regardless of the circumstances?
And like I just said, it's something I deal with every day. I deal with the PTSD and the trauma and the nightmares. It's not easy to deal with it.
Your book, presumably you're going to make money from this book. Do you feel comfortable making money from this, which ultimately is a tragic story? I repeat, you were acquitted. There's no reason you can't do a book. But do you feel comfortable making a lot of money out of essentially what in the end was an incident that cost the lives of other humans?
Well, I'm not writing the book to make money. I'm writing it.
I said here, and it's not like that right there. It kind of sounded very weird. It's just kind of the way I talk. Apologize for that. No, Kyle, you should not feel bad about it. And I understand post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm a veteran who's been to Iraq twice. I don't like to go on about it, but occasionally I will mention from time to time. There are a lot of vets out there who struggle with it, a lot of people who struggle with it in general. Post-traumatic stress disorder, oftentimes one of the main triggers of this entire thing, or one of the main things that people go for when they actually try to diagnose it, is memory loss. So, of course, there could be some haziness in his memory, all that stuff there. But if I recall correctly, the story was that after he took off and ran towards the cops after the initial shooting when he was on the ground, they told him that he could not turn himself in that night. They were too busy, so he went back home to Antioch, Illinois, where his mother's house was, and then he turned himself into that police department there. And then, of course, we all know he would go through the hell, which was the trial, which we'll cover more in detail in a look back come next year. Fact of the matter is that I understand what Kyle was going through. Obviously, the boy had to do some pretty bad things. He was put in a very, very bad situation, and he had to defend himself. But let's take a look at those three guys really quick. First of all, Gage Grosskreutz was the guy who left with just his arm blown off. This is the same guy who tried to sue the city of Kenosha after the trial, after he impeached himself on the witness stand during Kyle's trial. And he had a rap sheet. He had a record himself. And, of course, he even pointed a gun in Kyle's face, and Kyle just simply blew his arm off. DPMS Oracle rifle, 5.56, cost about $4.99 at the local gun store. Cheaply made AR-15, but not a bad AR-15. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what I own in my house, but I've had some experience with that. Weapon's actually pretty good. Weapon itself, actually, to be accurate for it to be so cheap. Of course, some people would prefer to have, at the very minimum, a Bushmaster, or maybe a Daniel's Defense, or maybe a SIG, or whatever, but still at the same time, not a bad weapon. Then you get this guy, Joseph Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum had been let out of a mental institution earlier that day. Rosenbaum had been charged with sex crimes involving minors, several. And of course, Rosenbaum was the one that was screaming, "Shoot me," can't say the word. He was the one that kept on screaming it at Kyle. And of course, when Kyle got away from the initial spot they were at, Rosenbaum chased him down, and Kyle turned around and got him as Rosenbaum was diving towards him. But still, though, at the same time, this was a guy who molested kids. So he did that in self-defense. And then, of course, Huber, who had, by the way, been arrested months prior for assault and holding an old lady up. Of course, his girlfriend said something like, I actually pray, I hope Kyle finds true love. I hope he can experience it. These people with their crazy messaging and stuff like that. So the fact of the matter is that Kyle really, in my opinion, should not feel guilty about anything. He simply defended himself, which, of course, is going to come up a little bit more in this interview. This next part's roughly 2 minutes. Let's go ahead and review this and come back on the other end. But we have to talk about gun laws and where it is that Piers, of course, gets this entire thing wrong, and, of course, overall gun culture itself.
Keeps putting out there that I'm some type of white supremacist, racist person, when that's just not true. I'm a 20-year-old kid who was put in a situation to where I was forced to defend myself, and I'm writing to put that into a book. I wrote a story and put that in a book so I can share that with everybody so they can understand what I went through, how my childhood was growing up, and the difficulties I deal with today. And you can check out the book at rittenhousebook.org if you want to read it and learn the truth for yourself.
How do you feel that you became a hero to many on the far right, kind of made you their poster boy?
Well, Piers, I'm not a hero. I did what I had to do to defend myself. There are countless Americans every day that defend themselves, and it's not a heroic thing to do. It doesn't make you a villain, but it doesn't make you a hero. It's doing the right thing to stay alive. If I didn't defend myself, I wouldn't be here talking today.
You were 17 at the time. You were too young to legally acquire the gun that you used.
That's not true.
It's not true?
That is not true. Wisconsin statute says a person between the ages of 16 and 17 can carry a long rifle with a barrel longer than 16 inches. That's Wisconsin law, and the judge dismissed that charge.
Okay, so you were. So let me ask you. Look, I'm in the country right now, and I've talked about this many times, both here and in America, and I've learned Americans want to handle their own gun culture the way they want to handle it. I respect that. But let me ask you, do you think it's right that 17-year-olds in America, in Wisconsin, should be able to carry around semi-automatic rifles like an AR-15?
Our founding fathers were very intentional when they wrote the Constitution. They didn't put an age limit on how old you have to be to exercise the Second Amendment.
But they did say it would be part of a well-regulated militia.
Now, I've told you, Piers has always been an anti-gunner, but we'll talk more about that towards the end of the video in the closing remarks, because if you kind of pick up on anything that Piers says there, he's still trying to push the narrative that people under the age of 18 should not have firearms. We'll talk more about this in the closing segment, but let's get back to it. Now, there's something I did not address in the first part, but I want to address it now. If Kyle Rittenhouse wants to write a book, he can write a book. If you want to write a book, you can write a book, okay? If you want to write a book, go ahead and write a book. This right here is the United States of America. And what I really find funny is all the socialist grifters out there who've got millions of dollars in their pocket, millions of dollars, big ass homes, stuff like that, living, grifting off of capitalism while selling the socialist grift. A lot of these people are never actually going to be involved in any form of left-wing civil war. You take someone like Vosh or Hassan, people who scream and holler, you must submit to the mob, which of course you don't have to. I advise you fight back. Also, something else too, these same people who also scream for killing right-wingers, conservatives, or anybody who just disagrees with them. After a while, next thing you know, socialists are going to be considered to be right-wing in a world full of communists. As I've said before, if something like this was ever occur, it would happen in very, very big blue cities where there's nothing but Democratic voters, because they typically tend to self-destruct. Once you actually begin to get the true feelings of them actually begin to come out, that's actually what ends up happening. The identity politics eventually backfires. Don't worry, that'll come up next year because it's going to be chaotic. But the thing is this right here. Obviously, you have a right to defend yourself. Second Amendment of the Constitution, basically what it says for the security of a free state, a well-regulated militia. And then, of course, the second half, it then says the right to the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That second half is what it is that allows you to be able to keep a firearm, and actually keep a firearm because, quite frankly, it's your personal firearm. You buy the firearm, it's your personal protection. It's your personal protection against the federal government. When the founders of the Constitution put that in, James Madison, so many other people put that in there, they did that so that way people could eventually band together to eventually fight back against a possible tyrannical government. There's also that thing, I think it's a battle, of Athens, Tennessee, where a bunch of veterans got together, World War II veterans. We'll probably do a project on this right here, got together to take out a very, very corrupt police department. The voting practices were pretty bad. It's a very corrupt place. And of course, they fought back against a very, very corrupt government. The fact of the matter is that you have that right for a reason. It's not just defense against the tyrannical government. It's also a defense against animals, self-defense, of course, the frontier land. Somebody's going to say it's outdated, but still at the same time, given the nature of the world today and given the people who are running everything, given the fact that now you've got Jack Smith, the attorney who's trying to prosecute Trump in the Mar-a-Lago N16 case, he is now calling for the records of anybody who hit the like button on Donald Trump's last tweet to be investigated. Sounds about that Second Amendment is 100% valid and 100% needed at this moment in time. And now you've got somebody asking why it is that Kyle Rittenhouse is writing a book. Well, I think he's entitled to do so, and quite frankly, he's allowed to do so given the circumstances of his life, given the fact that he tried to apply to Arizona State University, and they went to an absolute uproar and did not want him to be a part of their university because they're all a bunch of wokes. Fact of the matter is that the left in this country is very, very, very much the intolerant one in this nation. Let's watch a little bit more.
These firearms and to use them to protect ourselves.
How do people treat you, Carl, when you walk around now?
Well, there is some harassment. I'm constantly having photos taken of me. I'm constantly receiving death threats on social media. And it's just something that is part of my life now. Having pictures taken of me everywhere I go and the constant harassment and death threats.
Obviously, by doing a book and promoting it in the way that you are on national television around the world, you're going to make yourself even more famous, infamous, whatever you want to call it. Is that something you're aware of, that you're deliberately, consciously doing that?
I'm aware that it's going to bring some more notoriety to my name and make me more known, but I think it's worth that risk to share my story and share what happened, just in the hopes that maybe somebody else who goes through a similar situation or faces other trials in their life, they can read it and they can understand that they're not alone and that this happens to other people with the misjustice that does happen in America.
Okay. Kyle Rittenhouse, thank you for joining me.
The first thing I want to say here is that if you're concerned about how Kyle Rittenhouse feels, it's kind of his life. He's allowed to feel however the way he wants. So if you're trying to hint at him being selfish, I don't think that that's fair, given the fact that he was the one that was in that situation. And we could talk about whether he should have been in that situation or not a little bit later on in this video. But still, at the same time, the fact of the matter is that he's the one who was forced to defend himself. He was the one that was almost killed that night. So I think the boy is allowed to feel however the hell he wants, especially given all the other stuff that he's been through, especially involving the media. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but on Twitter, there were blue check marks and liberals out there who didn't, until the trial started, they actually believe that Gage, Grosskreutz, Huber, and Rosenbaum, they actually believe that these three guys were black when obviously these guys were white. That's how bad things are. That's what we call NPC, non-player characters, people who just digest whatever the hell the media says. And during the trial, if I remember correctly, MSNBC tried to run down the bus that was carrying the jury, and there was even a juror who was holding up the entire litigation process because it looked like an acquittal was on its way. But of course, there was a juror in there, possibly a Karen, that was holding up the entire process. So I think the boy is entitled to feel however the hell he wants. So everything the boy has been going through, I would say that he's right to do this. And of course, some people are going to say, well, he just wants some money. Yeah, he's got to make a living like anybody else. He has a story, a true story that helped shape 2020, George Floyd riots. Now, the only criticism that I have is that if I had been the boy's mother, I would never have allowed him to go to Kenosha, Wisconsin. But looking back on it, there's a silver lining here, and obviously it went to trial, and it should not have gone to trial, and quite frankly, one part of it was dismissed. Matter of fact, the case itself should have been dismissed outright, and when you actually go back and look at all the screwery around the prosecution, even pointing a gun at the entire court itself, brazenly showing you exactly how little he knew about gun safety, because even though the weapon was not loaded or didn't have a round in the chamber, still at the same time, it was very irresponsible of him to do so. I mean, even non-loaded guns, we don't just point them around and wave them around like a bunch of crazy cowboys. I mean, it's just the way that it is. The thing is this right here, with all the nasty tricks that were pulled, especially with the media, I'm surprised the boy did not get paid out. I talked about that little Chiefs fan and his family and how they should actually sue everybody who printed that article or ran with the narrative that he was just some little racist, when the only thing he was doing was wearing black and red face paint to support his football team, and even players, mostly black players, were doing the chop with him. 5-year-old little boy. It just goes to show you exactly who these people are. They don't care who it is that they attack. There's all kinds of explanations why that right there may be the case. I personally think it's just good old-fashioned Satanism, satanic, and of course it's obviously demonic. These people obviously need Jesus, but I don't even know if Jesus at this moment in time would even, well, we all know Jesus would, but still at the same time, though, that's kind of what these people have got in them. As far as Kyle being there that night, like I said, if I had been his mother, I never would have allowed him to leave the house. I just wouldn't have. It was an unsafe environment. He was 17 years old, and quite frankly, he shouldn't have been there. But knowing what we know today, the Second Amendment, for the most part, is in fact secure. They already put it on the trial. It won. Then you had the Bruin case. You've had so many other Supreme Court cases that have occurred over the past few years that have secured the Second Amendment even further, not just to mention the fact that you already had McDonald's Chicago and Heller, D.C., that should have already secured this entire situation, but still at the same time, the left is going to continue to come for your firearms, and of course, they're going to continue to go after you. So the best thing you can do is just stand your ground and fight. Never bow down to the mob, never apologize to these people. Even if Piers Morgan was being friendlier than what he normally is in interviews, you never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, give these people any form of olive branch at all. Now, there's one thing that, quite frankly, I missed, and I want to discuss this now. This is actually where I'm going to end the video. And don't worry, I'll be making a bit of a Second Amendment, a little bit more case on the Second Amendment here in a second. The situation involving him owning a firearm, which, by the way, the Wisconsin state statute does say you can have a firearm. The thing about 18-year-olds owning a gun is this here. There was a tweet that was posted a while back by Lauren Southern. I don't have that tweet, and I'm not going to go through her page because she's got like 1 million of them. She posted, imagine allowing an 18-year-old on a firearm. Now, Lauren Southern's supposed to be of the Canadian right, but of course, Canada, they got their gun issues too, where they've actually been taking firearms from people too. And of course, she has done a documentary on this for Timcast, and she seems to have been somewhat red-pilled on the topic of the Second Amendment, and I commend her for actually doing that. I always commend somebody for going and getting educated on something and actually coming back, and maybe if they have a certain change, a certain perspective that's actually let's just say that's kind of pivoted a little bit, then I'll always give you credit for doing so. What I don't like is the people who know that their argument is stupid and they continue going through with it anyways. After a while, you just got egg on your face and you look like a complete total dumbass. The thing is this right here. She put that up there, and I think I responded to it, and it wasn't exactly one of my finest responses. I even got a response back from her and kind of got, let's say that what I said was correct, but it was not worded the right way. It was kind of, it came off as a little bit nasty, and obviously somebody has something to say about it. And Isaac is something I'm very proud of, but still at the same time, I still feel that I was right. Probably just should have worded a little bit better. I didn't say anything mean, nasty, didn't call her any names. I just said something like, imagine somebody who's not from the United States passing judgment on the country's culture. Something to that degree there, of course, is what it was. But still, it was kind of unnecessary. But still, I got a lot of self-deprecating things about me that, quite frankly, I don't mind shedding light on because I think it's even funny looking back on it. You need to be able to do so because, quite frankly, people say cringe crap on the site. But the thing is this right here. Kids come up in certain households, age, say, 7, 8, 9. I think I was 8 when I first learned to shoot a weapon with a .22 rifle. If you teach a child at a very, very young age to be safe about it, because let's be honest, kids go hunting and stuff, they go fishing too. If you teach them anything, if you teach them the right way, they won't do anything unsafe. This is one of the main reasons why it is that I believe that people under the age of 18 should be allowed to use a firearm, should be allowed to own one. Also, that doesn't mean carry it to school or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not endorsing that. I'm just saying private ownership should be allowed because you never know. But something else, too, that quite frankly needs to be said about this topic is, and I'm going to go ahead and hit on it very, very quickly before I say the last thing. When you've got people out there like Dakota Meyer, for example, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but I've done videos on the Gear Issue. Don't worry, we'll start posting the Gear Issue 33 probably start of the year because I've kind of let that channel lax, but still at the same time, it's going to be the project channel for military stuff. But still, the thing is this right here. He was out there telling people that you're never going to be as good as military, stuff like that. Look, guys, I am military, and I can tell you right now, if you want to practice your Second Amendment rights, please do so. Do it. Learn to shoot, train, get with other I mean, I took the position of, look, you shouldn't be telling these people this, right? If anything, as a Marine, you should be actually in there training with guys and showing them the ropes and teaching them things. Made me think that maybe he was a shield for the establishment, but we'll talk about him at a later date. Fact of the matter is this right here. The Second Amendment, the Constitution, was given to you so that way you would have the right to be able to defend yourself against would-be attackers, possibly defend yourself because at the time you had the frontier, animals, people live in rural areas who would defend yourself from bears, coyotes, things of that nature there. And, of course, it was also designed so that way you could have a way to put a check on your government. Now, I'm not saying go out there and do this, that, and the other. I'm just simply saying it's there, obviously, for a reason, and it's a right that, quite frankly, you should, in fact, cherish. As far as Kyle, how do I think he did in this interview? I know that I titled this video, Kyle Checks Piers Morgan. I felt for the most part he did, in fact, check him very well. Piers is actually a pretty tough interview because he loves to interrupt people, and I think Kyle conducted himself absolutely perfectly. He handled himself about as well as you can get, and also to go on top of that, he has a right to feel however the way he does, he wants to feel, given the amount of stuff that he's been through and given the fact that he was actually willing to turn himself in and go through the entire process. I'm pretty sure he'll become a better man as a result of it. With that right there being said, guys, make sure you guys hit the like button, subscribe, share the video. Please leave a comment in the comment section, hit the notifications bell so that way you guys are notified when videos come out. And I'll see you guys later.